In part 1, we explored Chrono's introduction and his setup as a character, and from this point we are going to see how the series progresses and challenges him as it moves forward. Now, I just want to quickly mention, in the last part, I realised now I was bringing up a direct comparison with Aichi more than I meant to. While I still intend to get across why Chrono is my favourite, I don't want to go too in-depth with comparisons to Aichi just yet. Reason being, I was rewatching Aichi's first couple of episodes for the last video, and I recognised some things I didn't notice or appreciate that much on my first viewing. And then it started to dawn on me that I first watched the show years ago. I used him as a comparison of how Vanguard handled character introductions previously, but if I was to fully compare the two characters directly, I don't think my memory would do Aichi justice. I'm pretty sure I do understand his character as an overview, but there must be details that I didn't see the first time or don't remember anymore. I might talk more about him someday, but in order to do that I would need to go through Aichi's 196 episodes. And considering I have other things going on, and the fact that I'm currently rewatching Chrono's 174 episodes, it's just easier if I focus on G right now. So that's what this is, exploring Chrono mostly just in the context of G. Though I will be mentioning Aichi a bit more at the start here, because they are the same franchise after all, and it's just going to help me set up my point for now. But overall I'm avoiding serious comparisons to the original show. I hope that clears things up and makes my intent more understandable. To me, Chrono's story felt the most focused and complete. At least when you're talking about the first 3 seasons. From episode 1, when Chrono finds that deck, all the way up to 97 episodes later in the final confrontation with Ryuzu, it feels consistent. His story gives the sense that they always knew what they were building up to and trying to accomplish. And when comparing Chrono to Aichi, I just feel like he has a lot more things going on with him. Aichi is by no means a one-dimensional character, but his arc is more or less straightforward. Shy boy gets bullied, becomes more confident as he plays, goes a bit overboard, and eventually realises he had the strength inside him from the start. And that's not a bad thing by itself. I thought his arc was told well and I like his character, but I always felt Chrono had that extra bit of depth to him. His arc may seem similar at first glance. It's a boy with social problems learning to express himself better through Vanguard. But there's more to it than just being shy and then coming out the other end confident. I feel like there's more to facilitate that point A to point B. From what I can remember at least, there's no particular reason why Aichi is shy, he just is. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that on its own. Some people just are how they are, and I myself have had social anxiety from a young age, so I do relate to Aichi in that sense, and I don't believe there necessarily needs to be a reason. But from the perspective of storytelling, adding a why allows for more to be explored. Not only does Chrono have social issues, we see how they formed. We see specifically what led to it, and how it affects the person that he currently is. And having this background allows the character himself to reflect on it and learn through it throughout the series. Chrono could have just been socially awkward and therefore rude because that's just how he is, but adding more layers gives the character more detail and gives me more to think about as a viewer. And while flat characters are a thing and they can work, my personal preferences will always just prefer characters that are more complex. Not saying that means Chrono is necessarily better than Aichi, that's up to opinion, but it's a reason why I find him more compelling. Chrono's journey is the social experience of a teenager, and while Aichi also did this, Chrono goes into more detail with the intricacies of this and how it impacts his life. It's not just about how Vanguard changes him, but how his friends, family, personality and background end up affecting his experiences with Vanguard. A continuous back and forth between his personal and Vanguard lives. And it's a complex journey. Even when he grows in one way, he's challenged in another. It's that constant feeling of always improving in different ways. But everything still builds up to one particular confrontation season after season that finally feels earned when we get there. And yes, when I say that, I'm mostly talking about seasons 1 to 3. I'll be honest and say I didn't watch much of Next and therefore haven't seen GZ either. Just because those first 3 seasons felt like a complete story, After the villain that hung over the entire show was taken care of, the rest just felt like filler to me, as if they were forcing it to continue. But for the sake of a full analysis, I will cover those seasons eventually. So it will be interesting to see how they handle the characters. But all I'm saying right now means nothing until I actually go through it. And we haven't even finished Season 1 yet. As mentioned last time, Episode 1 gave us a pretty good introduction to Chrono as a person, along with the basic how and why of him playing Vanguard. Episode 2 provides little bits of context to things we saw in Episode 1, as well as just giving us more time with our new protagonist. We begin with a small recap from last time. Chrono recounts how he encountered the deck, the feelings that Vanguard gave him, and the new possibilities it offered him. Then, after the opening, they waste no time in giving us a glimpse of Chrono's home life, with what we can assume is his normal morning routine. One main point to notice is that it's just him alone. He prepares his own food, sits by himself, and leaves the house without needing to tell anybody. At this point, it's unclear if he's alone all the time, but it's obviously not an unusual occurrence. After he leaves, we cut to him visiting Card Capital again. He has a brief encounter with Shin, but Kamui soon overtakes the conversation. They discuss a bit about Chrono's newfound interest in Vanguard and the Gear Chronicle clan. There's also a quick exchange where Kamui asks Chrono why he never played Vanguard before, and he responds by saying his orphanage never had it. It's easy to miss since it's glossed over rather quickly and not even mentioned in the dub. But if you're paying attention, it adds that extra detail. We saw previously how closed off and uninterested he seems, and now we see a bit about why. Granted, we don't get the full details yet, but with that line about the orphanage, and with what we see of his home life, it is clear that he lacks a consistent parental figure. We can tell that Chrono spends a large amount of his time alone, and with the orphanage line, it's safe to assume he's been like that through childhood as well. And I believe that justifies his general behaviour. He's not rude because he wants to be, he's socially awkward. And he's socially awkward because he didn't have a secure attachment with a key supportive figure. Yes, there were probably staff at the orphanage, but that's not the same. There's a certain type of attention, type of socialization that only parents can provide. Chrono never had that primary carer to talk to or use as a safe base to explore the world from, so eventually he had to be that for himself. Childhood is the foundation of the rest of your life. And without that support, I think the cause and effect is easy to understand. But moving on, the two soon get interrupted by Trinity Dragon. I actually like Trinity Dragon in terms of side characters. This first appearance is a bit one note, but we see a lot more of them in the future. Kamui teaches Chrono about quests, the association, and gives him a Figer. And we also get introduced to the quest system. Now, I don't like quests from a logical point of view. The technicalities of it aren't really explained, and there's so many things that just wouldn't work in real life, but I do think the overall grade system is fine in terms of its narrative function. Part of Chrono's journey is becoming a better player, and although it's a bit of an obvious way to show it, grading up does represent progression. Quests can also be used to introduce different situations and characters and give Chrono an excuse to actually participate in them. But for now, he ends up competing in a quest against Trinity Dragon. In terms of character, not a lot happens at this point, but it gives more time for the audience to get used to the protagonist's various characteristics. He has some moments of bad communication, but we also get to see more of his passion and enthusiasm. And considering this is a first-time watcher's second experience with Chrono, having a more light-hearted scenario, just seeing him do things is perfectly fine. Just giving you more time with the character. And he does get some small reactions from Shion and Tokoha, which give them a chance to see that other side of him that they don't know about at school. But for people that aren't a fan of that, episode 3 is a lot more direct in its plot and character impact. It challenges our protagonist, forces him to reflect on himself, and gives him a goal for the story. Things start off a bit easier though, as we see Chrono come in early in the morning to look at quests. Kamui mentions how he's apparently been coming to the shop non-stop for the last 2 weeks. And this is the start of a reoccurring theme of Card Capital being a second home. Aichi had this too, but I feel like it has more significance to Chrono, considering the comparison of what we see his home life to be like, and his growing relationship with Kamui is also very important. For example, you can see that his interactions with Kamui are a lot easier than the ones he has at school, probably because the shared interest in Vanguard is allowing for more natural conversation. Plus, it's that sort of positive adult relationship that Chrono just didn't have for a long time, and we'll see this increasing dynamic with Kamui as the series goes on. Chrono soon accepts a quest and through it goes on to meet Ibuki. I always considered Ibuki to be a G character. I know he appeared in the movie first, but G is the series that actually fleshes him out, and his relationship with Chrono becomes so essential that G is just where he belongs. The two enter the gear system and their fight begins. I'm not a fan of the holographic technology usually, but the pure joy Chrono experiences as it enhances his favourite game is more than justifiable to me, and in particular it helps draw attention to his connection to Gear Chronicle, as we get visual tastes of Chrono and the units mimicking each other's movements. And along with a line about how using the clan feels like fate, there's clearly something special about this pairing. But about the actual fight, this is where Ibuki essentially beats reality into Chrono. Chrono finds himself unable to think in the way that he usually does, and is unable to keep up with the way Ibuki plays. And this leads to him not enjoying himself in the way that he normally does. Eventually, Ibuki rids Chrono of all his rear guards and just leaves him standing alone. This causes Chrono to snap, stating, "What's wrong with being alone? I can survive on my own." And Ibuki replies, "Even though you're afraid of being alone, you prefer to be alone. How childish." And from this, we get a small look into Chrono as a child. He's on his own, and we see what looks like his parents going away. It's not clear at this point whether they're gone or just left, but it at least shows that Chrono has been alone for a very long time. By the time he grows up, of course he doesn't want to be alone, but he doesn't know what to do, he doesn't know any different. A child that isn't given opportunities for positive relationships is going to turn into a teenager that struggles to find them. Vanguard was his escape from that, his chance to change things, but now Ibuki is reminding him, no, it won't happen that easily. You can't just instantly get over something like that. And at this point, Chrono is unhinged. He tries to stride, but his wild emotions cause the system to react in a weird way. And unbeknownst to him, what appears to be a physical Vanguard unit materializes outside. People like to say that Vanguard G had no plot until the tournament arc, but we're only on episode 3 and this is pretty big foreshadowing. And what I like about this moment is that you can come back to it with knowledge from season 3 and explain what happened. It's both a strong character moment and foreshadowing for the main plot. There is something special about Chrono and these units, and the show is telling you that they have a plan. But for now, since the system shut down, the fight ends. Ibuki leaves, and when Chrono asks for his name, he says he'll learn it once he gets better. After this, Chrono is left destroyed, which the visuals express with him going to the same place he was at the end of the first episode. Back then, he was running to his future, but now he's being dragged back to his past. You can try to move on, and that's good, but sometimes there's just going to be moments where all that pain just comes back to you. Episode 3 shows Chrono that he needs to work hard, and it gives him a physical goal for that in the form of Ibuki. He needs to get better at card fighting, but to do that also needs to grow mentally. Vanguard means a lot to him, but it's only one part of his life at the end of the day. It's not going to get rid of that other part. Being a different person while playing is one thing, but Ibuki makes him realize it's not so easy to separate. If he wants to keep enjoying Vanguard, he's going to have to confront his problems and get to the point where he can enjoy the rest of his life as well. On the surface level, Ibuki is something to overcome through Vanguard, through doing quests and getting better at the game. But that journey has now become tied to his personal life as well. Ibuki used the fight to reveal Chrono's true nature, and as hard as it may be, he's going to have to improve himself holistically as a whole. That is essentially the running theme through this season. But for now, episode 4 goes into a more lighter tone again. which is fine because you can't be heavy all the time and it doesn't forsake what happened previously entirely. Chrono reflects a bit about the last episode and about how to get stronger. He plays around a bit with pretending to be his units, which I actually really like. Considering his usual sternness, it's nice to see the playful side that Vanguard brings out. Unfortunately, due to his actions, he gets blamed for something that isn't his fault. Shion helps calm the situation down, but Chrono, again, just being awkward and not rude, isn't great at accepting apologies. And since he's in a rough state from Ibuki, he goes to the card shop to think for a bit. And again with that second home idea, I like how this is the first place he thinks to go, along with how Kamui takes the time to check up on him. But he soon brings attention to the fact that the shop got a package for Chrono, which turns out to be another Gear Chronicle card. In a more slice of life episode, this is the story still reminding you of the plot and that ongoing mystery, but it also serves as a nice excuse to get Chrono back into the Vanguard swing of things. He gets a new card so he can turn his attention back onto quests, and now with the goal of actively improving himself. He takes one to retrieve a card from someone's grandma, but of course with his lack of social skills he has no luck convincing her to let him in. But props to him, he tries his best. This results in the woman getting him to do a lot of chores around the house. I know going from magic dragon to grocery shopping might be a bit of a weird contrast, and I understand if some people don't like that, but it has a purpose. By this point, we know Vanguard is Chrono's comfort zone, so he's essentially using his hobby to take his mind off of something that was visibly getting him down earlier. We saw how much he was thinking about it, so it's important that he's able to distract himself and focus on something less serious instead. And it's not like he just completely forgets about Ibuki, because it's brought up a few more times. I feel like when people complain about Vanguard G's slice of life aspects, they're more bothered about the surface level concepts of them, rather than looking at what they actually do for the characters. I mean, I won't deny it's definitely distracting and does get in the way sometimes, but I think it often helps characterization a lot more than hinders it. But anyway, he soon returns to find Shion already in the house and with the card. Turns out he was just let in without any trouble. Considering what he just went through, Chrono is understandably a bit bothered by that, and Shion offers him the card, but Chrono's humility refuses. That is until he gets challenged to a card fight. The fight serves to give Chrono and Shion a bit of rivalry, but it also allows Chrono to just enjoy the game again and get excited at the thought of fighting new and stronger players. And there is a brief moment where we see his inner thoughts as he looks at Shion's hand and thinks about what to do, which could be interpreted as him learning a little bit from Ibuki and changing his fight style to be a little less reckless. With determination to surpass himself, he strides Chrono's command dragon. This results in him defeating Shion and leaves a bit of animosity between their conflicting personalities. There's also the fact that, on the surface at least, Shion acts really politely about losing to Chrono, and the fact that Chrono is bothered by that could be reflective of when he lost previously, considering when he lost to Ibuki it really got to his head, and although Shion does indeed feel that as well, he doesn't show it, so that bothers Chrono a bit. He doesn't understand how someone can be so okay with losing. Episode 4 was Shion's first major interaction with Chrono's card fighting side, so episode 5 is Tokoha's turn. But throughout the episode, Chrono deals with an enemy even bigger than Ibuki in the form of a toothache. Yeah, going back on what I said before, this is one of the moments where the slice of life stuff doesn't really impact the characters in any meaningful way, and it didn't really need to be here at all. But it also doesn't take away from anything. He'll constantly hold his face in pain to the confusion of those around him, and this type of thing is usually rife for making forced misunderstandings, especially for the comedic tone that this show generally tries to go for, but it never really takes away from any of his interactions, and the characters go through what they need to go through in the end. It never drastically interrupts what happens, it's just there. I don't particularly find it funny for the most part, but it doesn't do any harm. We start with getting more of Chrono's interactions in school. Kumi drops some food and Chrono quickly returns it without looking for any praise. Tokoha confuses the scene for him picking on her, which reaffirms his social status at school because this is the natural conclusion people just come to. His good actions stand out in the end though, as Kumi corrects her and says that Chrono didn't do anything wrong. And in fact it looks like he was the only one that bothered to help in the first place. And we get another moment of Tokoha learning to understand Chrono as she comes across him in the card shop, just smiling. Again, it's another example of the difference between him when he's in his normal life in school and when he's playing Vanguard. And this gets acknowledged more directly the next day when she apologizes for her assumptions. Chrono later accepts a quest to fight Kumi, which really just serves as more two-fake comedy. But by the end of it though, Chrono and Tokoha come to a better understanding. The comedy for this episode didn't really work for me, but I do like that part at the end where they go to the dentist and he starts freaking out before they even do anything. So overall, the episode was just the start of Tokoha and Kumi getting to see Chrono for who he really is. I would have saved the two-fake stuff for a different episode so we could have more focus on those character interactions, but it's not too bad. Episode 6 gives more of an introduction to the wider Vanguard community. Unfortunately, Chrono doesn't get a lot of interactions with the wider community because, he spends most of the episode being shuffled around by a man in a costume. Though I suppose it does say a lot about his inner softness that he keeps helping the branch chief and even goes along with the Vanguard Act despite all the problems that he's caused him. I mean, I'm sure most people would have turned him in as soon as the high-rated quest showed up. Chrono doesn't do that. And he does get a nice talk with Mamoru at the end where they promise to fight once Chrono improves more, and that continues Ibuki's setup with the wide world of professional fighters that Chrono has to work towards. But overall, not a lot of character growth, and you could blame that on the slice of life, but I don't think so, because this is about the Vanguard Association and the Dragon Branch, not Chrono, so even if it wasn't slice of life, the episode still wouldn't have given anything. It still served a purpose, it was world building. Episode 7 is more rich blonde than swirly hair, but it shows more of Shion and Chrono's relationship. They show this off immediately when they see who can clean the windows fastest, and I like how they don't even discuss it, they just naturally start competing. We see that Chrono is more open about the challenge while Shion still puts on a polite front, and they eventually end up competing in a quiz event to settle things a bit. Really, the most important part of this episode is that Chrono forms a deep connection with a cosplayer, and everything besides that is just filler really. But if I do have to talk about the objectively less important parts, there is Chrono's continued persistence throughout. Shion makes a particular point about learning not to give up throughout the episode, but for Chrono that just comes naturally. It's partially that innate energy he has. Shion also helps a child throughout the episode by encouraging them, and Chrono pays attention and helps out in his own way. This may just be him being nice in general, but it could also be related to his particular soft spot for children that gets more focused later on. Chrono and Shion repeatedly challenge or one-up each other as the contest continues, although Chrono does help Shion near the end. They aren't open about it, but I imagine they've gained a bit more mutual respect by the end of the episode. Episode 8 is pretty much just inconsequential. Every episode before this, even if it was more light-hearted, still served a purpose, such as world building, building relationships, or introducing characters or setting up story details. Episode 8 introduces Nagisa, but it does nothing for Chrono or Trinity Dragon, and Kamui you just feel sorry for. And especially when you're like me and could not stand Nagisa in the first place, this episode does nothing to change your mind. It's her first G appearance and the character has grown older, so you think she's going to be more mature now. But no, it's just the same unhealthy obsession as before. I mean, the episode serves a purpose for this character, and if you like this character, that's good, but I don't, so we're skipping it. Episode 9 is primarily Tokoha focused, so again we don't get much swirly hair action. Chrono does, however, help in small moments here and there, and there is one particular scene at the beginning that shows his attachment to children, where Mamoru states how popular he is as he's seen helping them. When I watched this for the first time years ago, I didn't pick up on that aspect of his character at all until it got more direct focus later. So I like that they do drop these little details about him before they get more direct mentions. Things like that make me believe that they really did know what they were doing with Chrono, and everything that happens to him is purposeful on his journey. Even if it's an episode focused on another character, they still go out of their way to show something about him. But now we get into the little Jaime arc, where Chrono's growth comes to the forefront yet again. Episode 10 introduces us to Jaime, and yes, I am pronouncing his name that way. As far as I can tell, that is the original Spanish pronunciation for that name, and it's even spelt that way. There's even a line in the Japanese version where Jaime straight up corrects Chrono on how to pronounce his name, but of course the English dub is having nothing to do with that and just treats his name like we would do Jaime. Nothing wrong with Jaime's, but that's not his name. It's one of those things where I do think G's dub is genuinely good most of the time, but there's some things that they completely change and don't care to really carry over properly. I mean, this isn't just a throwaway line, it's a part of the character's origins and cultural identity. And there are many dub watchers out there that probably permanently get his name wrong. In fact, that was me until I recently just watched this in Japanese, so sorry if I'm not very good at it, but I'm at least going to try and say his name correctly. But anyway, the episode is about Chrono taking on a quest to help Jaime learn about Japanese culture. Well, it's supposed to be Japanese Vanguard, but Jaime hijacks it. And at first glance, this is just more random slice of life stuff. But Jaime's mini arc over the next couple of episodes and Jaime's character himself does quite a bit for Chrono. And I think setting up the characters a perfectly good use of time. And upon rewatching, I actually have a lot more appreciation for Jaime's interactions than I did the first time. A good example is actually right at the beginning where Jaime asks Chrono more information about himself and his family. He hesitantly responds that it's only his aunt, and you can see in Jaime's face that he immediately picks up the implications of that and changes the subject. And just after that we get a small line about how Chrono has only lived in the area for about a year. Again, that adds just that extra bit of justification to his attitude and general social status. Being new to an area of course means you're going to have more trouble talking to people, and considering his parental history, that's just going to make things worse. But also the fact that he's been here for a year but hardly knows anything about his surroundings shows the consequences of his isolated lifestyle. You go to school because you have to, but outside of that, especially when you're in the state that Chrono was, there's no need for you to go anywhere else. You have no desire or necessity to explore the area and no one to see. This episode serves as an effective example of how Vanguard has opened up Chrono's life and given him opportunities he didn't get before. And that's also an advantage of the quest system, getting him to meet these people like Jaime and go to these places that he wouldn't have done. This is explored further through a montage, contrasting Jaime's overly friendly personality with Chrono's more reserved nature. Jaime leads Chrono to experience many things that he most likely never would have tried before, and this comparison of their personalities is something Chrono begins to acknowledge himself, as Jaime continues to show what a people person he is, and Chrono somewhat enviously states how he would never be able to do something like that. We see with the rickshaw driver and the young boy that Jaime is a good judge of character. And someone like that who pays more attention to the finer details of a person is especially good for Chrono, who has a history of making bad first impressions. And it is also fun to see Chrono get a bit embarrassed with how open Jaime is. This is Jaime's introduction, so most of the episode is just focused about building him up, but over the next few episodes he does have an important impact on Chrono. And now we move on to one of my more favourite episodes so far, number 11. We start off seeing a bit more of Chrono taking care of himself, and we get a quick look at a note on the fridge confirming that Mikuru is currently out on a business trip. Again, it's setting these things up but not beating you over the head with it, which is really nice. Everyone goes to watch Jaime's fight with Mamoru, which particularly grabs Chrono's attention. Just because I like it, I want to quickly point out Kamui and Chrono sitting next to each other in the stadium and going home on the train. Small moments, yes, but I ship it. But soon they split up and Chrono reflects on the fight he saw. If you pay close attention to where he is, it says a lot about what he's thinking. This kind of scene on the bridge happened in episode 1, where he first discovered Vanguard and the hope for where it would take him. And again in episode 3, where Ibuki made him realise the journey he would have to go on and the measures he needs to take to get better at the game. Now he's reflecting after watching two professional players do their best against each other and wondering what he would have been like in that situation. He wonders what it would have been like to fight Jaime, which sets him up as another goal for Chrono to cross on his path to Ibuki. And that fight also works because we took time before to establish Mamoru as a pro player. The whole scenario pushes Chrono's drive to become stronger. And for my personal interpretation, you could also make the argument that he's comparing his own actions with Jaime's. Back during that fight in episode 3, Ibuki destroyed all of Chrono's rearguards, which just left him alone. Mamoru does something similar with Jaime by retiring his front row. When this happened to Chrono, he completely lost control of himself and was unable to finish the fight as a result. But on the other hand, Jaime was overjoyed to see his opponent's ability and respected their plays. He maintained his enthusiasm, filled up the rear guard again, and won because of it. I mentioned before how Ibuki brought out Chrono's playstyle with Vanguard and his personality, and emphasized the connection between the two. If he wants to get better, he has to do so both as a person and a card fighter. Considering the visuals of this moment directly call back to his moment of anger after that fight, Chrono is putting Jaime's personality up there as an example of what a pro player is like in contrast to his own temper. Someone who carries respect for their opponent, keeps calm in tough situations, and no matter what happens has fun throughout the entire fight. Though this part is just my personal interpretation though, so up to you whether you want to believe it or not. But I do believe the comparison is there. Regardless, the idea of getting stronger comes to the forefront of his mind as he eagerly scans the quest board the next day. If he completes the quest that he accepts, he should get to grade 2. He is stopped from going, however, when he runs into Jaime struggling to get directions. He helps him out, of course, but misses his quest because of it. He doesn't expect anything in return because that's just how he is, but Jaime feels responsible anyway. They eventually arrive at their destination, which turns out to be a children's home. And this, honestly, is where one of Chrono's more unique and interesting characteristics gets attention, which is his connection to children. Pretty much as soon as the children come out, Chrono is all over them. He crouches down to their level and talks with softness and patience. He helps one with a bruise and another with needing the toilet. He states that he spent so much time in a similar situation that he seemed to have developed some sort of empathy and relatability to them. I love this part of his character and I think it does a lot for him. First of all, it represents his duality, which is a constant theme of his interactions. By now we've gotten a good sense of his social awkwardness that makes him appear a bit rude or unenthusiastic on the outside, and to see all of that disappear completely as soon as he interacts with children is really nice. It goes to further show that that rudeness is not from negative intent but just awkwardness, and a lack of mutual social experience with people his age. With children, however, they thrive off of socialization and adult interaction. Or at least people older than them, since Chrono is not an adult. They're easy for Chrono to just get along with and show that nicer side to him. And whenever we see him interact with children, they like him. They are just as attached to him as he is to them, and it's the perfect analogy for that aspect of him. He is kind and friendly, he just needs the right situation to be confident in showing it. It is just a natural part of himself that developed from his circumstances. Tells you a lot about him and just makes sense. Chrono eventually sits down with the man in charge as he talks a bit about his desire to help children and his connection with Jaime. We get a small flashback to Chrono in his orphanage. And for all the little bits we've been given about his loneliness as a child, it's good to actually see it. Like I said, it planted all those little pieces before so you could figure it out, but now it's actually showing you. Watching this show again, I've been surprised by how much of Chrono's character is show and not tell. Like how I mentioned before with the moments with Chrono on the bridge, the dialogue doesn't present a heavy connection between those scenes, but the visual storytelling does. There are a lot of moments where the deeper context is there and it trusts audience interpretation to fill it out, which is really nice to see. And the fact that this is a children's show made to sell their card game doing this makes me confident that these people want to tell a story. We get a quick shot of a plane flying by, which I assume represents Mikuru going on a business trip. And that means she's been doing this for a very long time, which lends more credence to Chrono's general loneliness. He did have an adult, but she wasn't around that much out of necessity. And in some sense that makes it worse, knowing you have someone but they're off somewhere else and don't have the time to spend with you. And since Vanguard has now become the game that helps with that loneliness and creates the environment for him to interact with people, it feels a shame that he didn't have it sooner. And Emilio's line here is really nice. Since you couldn't do it back then, make up for it by having fun now. In other words, the past may have been unfortunate, but things are looking up for you now, so make the most of that. And I do think Chrono's general expressions and outward behaviour have changed from when we first met him. He's subtly grown more visibly happy. We then get a nice goodbye and Chrono and Jaime start walking back together. Since they both have backgrounds in lonely childhoods and orphanages, they bond a bit about their experiences. and Jaime hints that he's very similar to Chrono in the way that he didn't have a big passion until Emilio got him into Vanguard. Unfortunately, his card flies right out of his hands, which results in him getting soaked in order to save it. This leads to Chrono taking Jaime home, where we get more direct confirmation that Mikuru isn't home much. And Jaime also barges straight into Chrono's room. Now, I obviously don't condone smashing into people's bedrooms, but it's not out of line with Jaime's enthusiastic character, and it shows how much he trusts Chrono after the short time he's known him. I'm sure that if he felt like he would actually offend him, he wouldn't have done it. And in a meta sense, I do like this scene. A lot of shows in general tend not to focus on a character's personal living space, because it's not really necessary, and when you don't have a lot of time you need to focus on more important things. But if you think about the nature of a bedroom, it's incredibly tied to who you are as a person. It's likely where you're at your most vulnerable. It is where you sleep, where you keep a lot of your things and just express yourself. For Chrono, it shows us a bit more aspects of his mindset that expand on things we already know about him. Considering his lack of passions before Vanguard, it makes sense that his room would be a bit plain. Though he does also mention this is on purpose, as it will make it easier for him to move out in the future. He says how he wants to live independently as soon as possible, which makes sense for his character as he's already accustomed to doing things himself. Likewise, it could also be reflecting his more selfless side, as he doesn't want to burden Mikuru by him living there. It shows a bit of guilt and maturity that he's developed. Also, unrelated moment, but I just find it funny the way Jaime physically cringes when he discovers that Chrono actually studies. Chrono soon returns Jaime's card, and the two reflect on what the game has done for them as individuals. Chrono mentions how playing Vanguard helped him discover a new part of himself, which is nothing we couldn't infer before, but holds more significance now that we've been reminded of his earlier life, and also about Jaime's similar inspiration, along with Emilio encouraging Chrono to not let what he was like before hinder who he's starting to become. His past isn't something that he's going to easily forget, but he has more than just that to focus on now. He has a new passion to drive him, and for the sake of that feeling, he challenges Jaime to a fight. And although he has some personal doubts for not being on that professional level, Jaime reassures him that there's nothing wrong with pushing yourself to fight stronger people. They settle on fighting tomorrow, with a quest also being set up so that if Chrono can prove what he can do, he'll grade up. And with that, the two part ways for the time being. Episode 12 is the end of Jaime's little arc. Chrono's time with him up to this point has in large part been about reaffirming what Vanguard means for both of them, and here we get the culmination of that. The last episode explored Chrono's past a bit more and how Vanguard has been helping him come to terms with it. It also reminded us about his fight with Ibuki and how his growth as a card fighter and as a person are tied together. Even though there's still a ways to go, this episode shows us and Chrono that he has grown a bit since then. It provides him the opportunity to face another top player with everything that he has and overcome another milestone in his development. But first, a little bit of relationship building. I don't think I've mentioned them too much since I've mostly just kept this Chrono orientated, but I can't stay away from these two forever. One of the best things about the trio's relationship is that it's slow. They don't just have one or two fights and then immediately become a great team. Before they even think about forming a team, they take a while to contrast their personalities and warm up to each other naturally. I mean, we're 12 episodes in and you wouldn't really even call them friends yet. It takes the time to realistically show them getting to know one another. In this scene, Tokoha and Shion hear about Chrono going to fight Jaime, so they show up to give him a bit of advice. Not because they particularly really care and want to help him, but they share a common interest and want to add their thoughts on it. It shows the progression of how they used to not think much about Chrono, and now Vanguard has helped show them more of who he really is. They're not best friends yet, but they have no problem coming up and talking to him. It's that gradual progression that really shows the strength of G's focus on character. But after that, we start to see preparations for the main fight. Kamui attempts to ease Chrono's anxiety about fighting a top player. Everyone who's come to watch begin to arrive, and Chrono takes some time to reflect and prepare himself. He thinks back to Ibuki's words about how a fight reveals everything about a person and decides he's going to put his all into it. This confirms the representation of this fight being a milestone on Chrono's path to Ibuki, and prompts us to keep those events in mind. Chrono walks up to begin the fight but is still visibly nervous, and this is where Jaime delivers a small but great moment exclaiming how fun the fight is going to be. This not only helps Chrono calm down a bit but also reiterates the differences between the two. Whilst Chrono is stressing about whether he's good enough or not, Jaime is just thinking about how fun it's going to be. And I know that's easy when Jaime is the top player, but I'm sure even if the roles were reversed, he would still have the same enthusiasm. That is what helped him win the fight against Mamoru, and that stress is what led to Chrono losing to Ibuki, which is something he needs to overcome. But the fight soon begins and proceeds. Chrono is doing well until Jaime strides Lampros and unleashes a multitude of attacks at him. Chrono hardly survives but exclaims that he did take time to learn Jaime's playstyle beforehand, so it's very possible that he took care to save cards for defensive purposes, like with his perfect guard. Already that shows a little growth from Ibuki because he's not just rushing in and taking time to actually prepare and think about how he's going to play. To fight back, Chrono strides Chrono's command dragon and uses it to banish Jaime's rearguards. It looks like things are going his way, but Jaime had a backup and calls more units to counterattack. Chrono gets put into a tight spot and thinks about how he's not feeling that passion he usually does. This is because, just like his fight with Ibuki, he's losing. I know that might sound selfish, but there's more to it than just wanting to win. He sees a mental image of his younger self, saying how there's no point in him trying as they don't have anything. It's that thing anime does to use visuals to represent inner thoughts. If I had to use a single word to describe Chrono's relationship to Vanguard, it would be passion. That's what life without key parental figures stopped him from finding. Vanguard was a hobby that gave him that passion and helped him escape from his loneliness, until Ibuki made him realize he's still susceptible to those emotions and can let them get the better of him while playing. This led to Chrono maybe focusing too much on getting better. He felt like he knew what he was doing, then somebody who actually knew what they were doing destroyed him with no effort. It's hard not to feel some type of inferiority after that. Throughout this fight, Chrono keeps saying how he doesn't feel the same heat that he usually does, most likely because he's judging himself too harshly and doesn't have confidence in his own abilities. And that seeps into and links to his lonely childhood where he doesn't have value in himself in general. Jaime's catchphrase, "I feel it in my heart," may seem a bit gimmicky at first. It's that type of thing I don't like in shows where in order to make a quick side character memorable, they just slap a characteristic on and really emphasize that. And some characters you'll have it where their entire personality is basically just a type of speech pattern. But no, in Jaime's case it represents how he feels when playing Vanguard, and just responding to people in general. He's actually a good foil for Chrono, both being given a purpose through this game. Jaime always enjoys that passion to the fullest, and being able to recognise that in others as well only furthers his enjoyment, whilst Chrono worried too much about how he measured up against other people and didn't allow himself that enjoyment anymore. But when he reminds himself about what he didn't have before, he decides he's going to trust in that compassion again. Vanguard is helping him change his future and he wants to keep seeing where it takes him, and so he strides into Mystery Flare Dragon. It's a card that needs you to draw one of each of the 4 grades in your main deck in order to activate its effect, which is a statistic that you can't always guarantee is going to happen. The nature of that ability requires Chrono to trust in himself. It requires that confidence to act on his passion and go forward with everything that he has, which he was hesitant to do. Yes, it's dependent on luck in the end, but I personally give it a pass for its thematic relevance. Yes, it works out in the end and he draws the cards he needed, but from an in-universe perspective he could have just as easily failed. And even in real life, sometimes when you're playing card games you have to take those risks, and the scene is about Chrono gaining confidence to take that risk in the first place. It is that ongoing theme of him moving forward and changing his future. If it doesn't work for you, I can't help that. I usually get hung up on plot conveniences all the time myself. And I know things happening before doesn't excuse them from happening in the present, but this is a card game show and the original Vanguard did have a lot of these examples itself. So really it is up to you whether you give it a pass or not. But I do because it results from and impacts Chrono's character growth. And as Jaime states, it shows off his passion. Chrono wins and Ibuki is also shown to have been watching. He acts unimpressed, but the fact that he came to see Chrono in the first place shows that he's interested in seeing him improve. But regardless, Chrono finally reaches grade 2 and Jaime says goodbye. Overall, I actually really like the 3 Jaime episodes. Back when I saw the show for the first time, I thought it was a bit one note, but as I said, he works as a foil for Chrono. Like him, he didn't have purpose until Vanguard gave him passion, and he helps remind Chrono of the importance of following that passion. And he also helps give us a better understanding of Chrono's past and his general perspective. I think it's just interesting seeing them interact and get to know each other by sharing their common experiences, and they have a decent impact on one another by the end. And the last episode for now acts as a little breathing period. Kamui invites everyone to Card Capital in order to celebrate Chrono's win and grade up. It is very light-hearted with various fun character interactions. It's entertaining to see how Chrono reacts considering he's not used to being the focus of a party and having this kind of attention. He is genuinely a modest person who doesn't like to make a big deal out of his achievements. I especially like how he keeps trying to make excuses to take the sash off, and gets repeatedly embarrassed by the group's teasing. There is a scene where Kamui mentions moving up to grade 3, since Chrono will be able to enter official tournaments. And everything before is mostly just focused on individual characters and scenarios, but from here on it becomes more about the tournament and Tri-3 coming together. And that trio share a moment near the end of the episode. It isn't much, but it signals the start of the 3 of them as a whole getting more attention. Other small things to mention: Tokoha and Shion are essentially dragged into it, but Trinity Dragons show up to Chrono's celebration from the start. Despite not getting much attention, I think they have a fine enough relationship with him. Also, Kamui organising the party in the first place, and Shin closing the shop earlier for it. It's another example of the connection Chrono has to the store and the second home it provides for him. The whole thing is entirely light-hearted at the end of the day, but it's still entertaining. And finally, the ending is complete with all the characters we've met so far. So, to summarise, Episode 1 introduced us to Chrono and his Vanguard journey. He has a hard time knowing how to socialise with people and no real desire to do so, so he comes off a bit harsh. But he can be expressive and passionate given the right environment, which is what Vanguard provides him. He had nothing to really get into before, but now he does. He has the power to change his fate, choose where he goes, and he's excited to see where that's going to take him. Yes, episode 2 involves a bird chase, but it also has the purpose of showing us more about Chrono, dropping hints about his history and showing us more of the type of person he is now. With the combined knowledge of what we see from his home life and the line he drops about being from an orphanage, it gives more context to what we saw from him before. We aren't told everything at this point, but if you're paying attention, I don't think it's hard to infer that his social anxiety and closed-off attitude is linked to the isolation we see him in. And we can safely assume that started back when he was a child due to being in an orphanage and therefore having no parents. But beyond that, we get shown more of Chrono being expressive. Chasing a crow up a tree may seem a bit silly, but I don't think it's really that ridiculous. I remember when this first came out, people were absolutely heated about this silly moment, but I can suspend my disbelief more for a crow stealing a shiny Vanguard card than I can for 2 guys playing a children's card game in the freezing cold in the middle of an avalanche where they should have met their end right there and then. And the fact that Chrono is focused on doing something like climbing a tree for a card is a different side to him than what was seen at school. And this is something that both Shion and Tokoha comment on to an extent when they encounter him. It's also just more of an introduction for Chrono to the Vanguard world, with the quest system and also playing against Tsuneto. And this is just episode 2, so they don't need to give us any more than what they do. Episode 3 though is a lot more direct on its significance to both plot and character. It's well established by this point how much Chrono is enjoying Vanguard, which is also enforced by his excitement in the episode from using the gear system. Ibuki serves to remind him though that he is just starting on his journey, both as a card fighter and a person. Through a flashback we get more confirmation of his lack of parents during childhood. Unfortunately, he isn't ready to cope with these experiences and emotions yet, so he loses his temper. Technically this is a did not finish, but it's a personal loss for Chrono. It sets up the goal of becoming a better player and person simultaneously, and uses Ibuki as representation towards that. Vanguard is good as an escape from Chrono's past, but he's going to have to come to terms with it eventually. Episode 4 is more light-hearted but still has some nice character moments in there. I enjoy seeing Chrono goof around with his imagination, try his best to force a smile, and turn doing somebody's chores into a personal challenge for himself. And the episode does show a bit of how Ibuki affected him. We see it bothering him at the beginning, and it's what drives him to work hard doing those chores and when fighting Shion. Maybe it could have been given more focus, but those moments of him resolving to improve are still there, and I think it has a good balance. It also begins his relationship with Shion, with Chrono's spirit causing Shion to want to beat him that much more. Episode 5 doesn't do a lot, but similarly it has some nice moments. As episode 4 was about setting up Chrono's relationship with Shion, this is with Tokoha. We have that part at the beginning showing us Chrono being nice to Kumi and just being misunderstood at school, and Tokoha later sees him smiling in the card shop. In other words, how Vanguard allows him to enjoy himself more openly and show off that better side. And really the episode is just about Tokoha and Kumi getting to know Chrono better rather than showing the audience anything new about him, because of course Shion and Tokoha are part of the main cast too, so it's important we get their own introduction episodes for them. Episode 6, as I said before, is mostly just the branch chief's hijinks, but its focus is setting up the association and branch as a whole, along with that more competitive and professional aspect to Vanguard that Chrono and Tri-3 will become more invested in. And the episode is named after Mamoru at the end of the day, so it's more of an introduction to him and his branch, rather than anything particularly interesting for Chrono. I think I would have preferred it if maybe the branch chief just still carried Chrono around, but he gets back in time for his fight with Mamoru. Maybe they could have built more off what happened with Ibuki, as Chrono more calmly observes what Mamoru and that level of play is capable of, and maybe even get some advice from him along the way. But what it is serves its purpose fine. Episode 7 is all about Shion and Chrono's competitive relationship and contrasting their personalities. Chrono wears his passion and competitive nature on his sleeve. He has no problems expressing his desire to win and putting his all into the competition. Shion, however, has a sort of social reputation already. You would expect someone like him to always be modest and constantly praising other contestants, which he does. But it's clear that on the inside he wants to straight up win just as Chrono does. This was also shown in episode 4 after they fought, where Shion had to act like he didn't care about losing but was actually pretty annoyed that Chrono beat him. It's Chrono's blunt nature that brings out the more honest side to him in turn. There's also Shion's connection with Ryota, where he expresses his philosophy of never giving up. Comparing the backgrounds of Chrono, who came from an orphanage, and Shion that came from a rich home, we see how much Chrono has to do for himself at home, so he's used to always having to try. But in Shion's case, that lesson had to be drilled into him. Despite Chrono's competitive nature though, there is empathy to him. Shion, being the more socially adept, is the one to directly talk to Ryota and encourage him, but Chrono is just as observant and helps out in his own way. And why does he stop Shion from falling? I think that's because he wanted him to win for Ryota's sake, or at least to see him fight until the end. He can't be too obvious with that though, so he still instigates the final race between them. Maybe he even lost on purpose, but then again Chrono isn't the type of person to put a half-hearted effort into things, so maybe Shion did just genuinely win. Either way, it makes Ryota happy, and shows that even if Chrono isn't so direct about it, he will make an effort to help in the end. I mean, he wouldn't have saved Shion if he didn't at least want him to have a chance at winning. Episode 8 is not interesting to me, and 9 is primarily a Tokoha episode, but they do have that little foreshadowing moment with Chrono and the children which I do like. Episode 10 is all about establishing Jaime and his chemistry with Chrono. Jaime is ecstatic to explore everywhere and talk to as many people as possible, but Chrono is hesitant to do so and doesn't know the area well despite living around there. Jaime is good at reading people, such as the rickshaw driver and the boy, while Chrono takes some time to catch up in that regard. And Jaime will also see through and help Chrono as the episodes continue. Episode 11 shows more of the similarities between Chrono and Jaime's childhoods, along with giving more detail on Chrono's past, how that affected his present, his hope for the future, and Vanguard's place for him in all of that. The beginning of the episode draws parallels to the beginning of the series, when Vanguard first gave him that purpose, and to episode 3 where Ibuki gave Chrono's fantasy a reality check. Chrono compares himself to Jaime's plays and wonders if he's good enough, becoming unable to feel the same excitement he used to because of the objectively better players in front of him. During his visit to the children's home with Jaime, we expand more on his loneliness as a child, which continued into his teenage years with Mikuru not being around so often. It's easy to see how important an escape mechanism like Vanguard would be, and how it would be a bit scary losing your ability to just enjoy that by constantly worrying if you're good enough in the first place. Emilio encourages him to make the most of Vanguard since he does enjoy it, and the children's home provides a calming atmosphere for Chrono just to relax a bit. This is talked about more later on when Chrono and Jaime reflect on how Vanguard changed their lives. And when Chrono mentions how Jaime is a much better fighter, he's told not to worry and that challenging stronger fighters is part of the experience. In this episode we have Chrono's isolated home life, his desire to improve at Vanguard, loneliness in the orphanage, connection with children, relationship with Mikuru, and the impact of Vanguard. This whole thing is Chrono in a nutshell, and I love that. Episode 12 is a milestone for Chrono, which starts with him reflecting on that Ibuki fight and being nervous to fight Jaime. And when he gets into a bad situation, he even proclaims that he's struggling to get that excitement again. He even gets a mental representation of his younger self berating him, trying to bring him back to that loneliness that keeps coming to the forefront of his mind. But no, he has Vanguard now. Things are different. He's only just beginning his journey, and there's still so many places that feeling can take him. And through that belief, he takes a chance on himself and pulls off an unlikely win. He proved his spirit to Jaime and got to grade 2, and because of that, episode 13 is sort of a turning point. It's like a break after Chrono vs Jaime, and it shifts attention towards the tournament. Soon to be Tri-3 gets some moments, but it's nothing major as the succeeding episodes focus more on their relationship building. This is just the introduction to it. So in these 13 episodes we've seen the start of Chrono's journey. It's partly just set up for the bigger challenges he'll face in the future, but there's still good character building in there. Due to his unfortunate background, discovering something he can enjoy like Vanguard is a relief. And for a while he has a lot of harmless fun with it. That is until Ibuki shows him the more professional side of the game that he can't really ignore if he wants to get better and be a serious player. This leads to completing quest after quest in order to get stronger. Unfortunately, by the time Jaime fights him, all of that has got to his head. He's unable to enjoy himself like he used to, and he doubts his own self-worth. As the fight progresses, he learns to believe himself and bet on his card's ability. Even if he hasn't changed a lot at these early stages, there's still some good aspects of his character that get explored. And I think we've been shown enough about him at this point that it's perfectly possible to get invested in him. Chrono is shown as a fiery personality. He puts this all into his passions and is often honest and direct, even to a fault sometimes. But he's also a modest person who doesn't think too much about being praised for what he does. This is shown when he helps Kumi, Shion and Jaime, along with wanting to move home as soon as possible as to not burden Mikuru. This lack of praise for himself could also be seen as a sense of inferiority stemming from his background. Not having parents during childhood has influenced Chrono in many ways. There's the loneliness and little direction he has before finding Vanguard. He did not have great communication skills, which led to a difficulty in finding friends, and quite possibly a lack of value in himself. However, he does have good communication with children since his childhood is so present in his mind he's able to relate to them as a result of it. His arc with Jaime shows him reflecting on his childhood, and in their fight learning to believe in himself and value what he didn't have before. Vanguard helps him both meet new people and cope with his past experiences. It's more than just learning to talk to people, it's about learning not to hate himself essentially. The missing parents trope has been done so many times, but the way to make any trope work is to hammer down on the unique ways it affects your character specifically. When I say Vanguard gave him a purpose, I can't emphasize that more, and aside from all of that, there's still the more plot relevant mysteries about him. Why were the Gear Chronicle cards given to him? Why is he the only one that has them? What is his connection to that dragon that appeared in episode 3 and the units as a whole? Whether you're looking at the layers of his personality or connection to the overarching plot, I do believe Chrono is a genuinely interesting character, and it's not just about slapping a bunch of variables together, but linking them in a way that interact with one another, forming a complex but consistent person. Considering he's still got more to go through, I think this is a compelling start for his growth. And if you're still not a fan of him, well, keep watching, we've got a while to go. And if that is indeed the case, please let me know what you don't like about him so I might address it. But next time we will see how he continues to gain confidence and purpose through his relationship with Shion and Tokoha, as well as continuing their journey onto the tournament and the professional Vanguard world. I promise that won't take as long to come out as this one did. And in the meantime, why not rewatch G yourself? Maybe take my analysis in mind while watching, or see if there's anything that you notice yourself. And if you come to any conclusions that I didn't, I would like to know them. And of course, any praises or criticisms you have towards me are also appreciated, along with if there's anything you would like me to mention in the future. I am Tales of Gargantunaria, or TOG for short, and thank you.